Welcome to Project-Based Python. These tutorials will not cover Python basics in depth. If you need help with the basics, you can try PyLearning Companion. It is a Python study app that covers all the core concepts in short lessons, then tests your skills with hundreds of activities. PyLearning Companion is available on Android and iOS. You can find the links in the video description. Today we will create a Capitals of the World quiz that uses CSV. We will cover reading a CSV file as well as writing to one. We will then use Lambda to sort our CSV data. Let's get started. Before we get to any coding, let's look at a CSV file. So a CSV file is just a text file, and the CSV stands for comma separated values. And you can see that here. We have a country, comma, and then its capital. And the first row actually tells us what each column contains. Below that, we have all the necessary data. So now let's get started here. One more thing I would like to point out before we start is that this list of countries may include places that are not recognized worldwide. This is simply the longest list of countries that I could find. You can always make changes to it, but I will leave it as is for our quiz. Now we can start coding. So let's go over here and import CSV. And we will also import shuffle from random. So from random, import shuffle. Shuffle will allow us to randomize any list, and we'll see that in just a minute. We will create two lists next, and the first one will be country list, and we'll make that an empty list. Then a leaderboard, and the leaderboard will also be empty. We will use the country list to hold the countries in their capitals, and the leaderboard list will be used for saving scores after we're done with the quiz. Next, we can load the countries.csv file. So we will do that inside of a function. So def read file, and we need to pass in a file name. So the reason we're doing this in a function is that we're going to reuse this function to either open the CSV file that contains the countries and capitals, or to open the leaderboard. So we'll get to that. Next, we need to open the file. So with open, and we pass in the file name, and we're going to concatenate this file name with .csv. This will allow us to simply type in countries instead of having to type in countries.csv for the file that we're trying to pass in here. We also need to give it a mode, so we're going to say read only, because we are not going to make any changes inside of this function. And we'll open it as CSV file. So with open allows us to import a file, do something to it, and once we're done, it will automatically close this file. Now we need to create a CSV reader object, and we'll call that reader, and we'll say csv.reader and pass in the CSV file. So this is the file that we have opened up here. And now we can start doing something to it. But before we actually process the data, we need to handle this first row here. So we don't actually want country and capital displayed. We want to start with the actual countries. So we simply need to say next reader, and this will allow us to just move to the next line. Now we can iterate through the whole file. So we can say for line in reader, and we are going to check what the file name is first. So if file name equals countries, we are checking if this is the file that we have passed in here. We are going to update the country list. So country list.append, and now we're going to create a list for each country and capital. So the country list will contain lists of 2 items, and we'll print it out in just a second so we can see what that looks like. So we'll say line 0 for the first item and line 1 for the second item. So the first item will be the country, the second item will be the capital. And let's actually test this out right now. So first we need to read file, and we'll pass in countries. And then we're going to print the country list. So print country list. And here we have the output. So we have all of the countries and their capitals inside of two item lists. So the larger list, country list, contains each country and its capital inside of a separate list. We can then use this later to match one with the other. And one more thing we're going to do is shuffle this list. So by shuffling the list, we just randomize it every time. And all we need to do is say shuffle and country list. Also, I'm going to put another blank line here. So if I run this, notice that we have a whole different list of countries. Now, I mean, they're all the same countries, but they are in a different order. And to just drive that point home, I'm going to do it one more time. You can see that we have a different output this time. Let's also make sure that we're ready to handle a different file that we might try to open. So here we're just going to have an else statement, and this else statement is going to handle a file called scores.csv. We don't have that file right now, but we will create it. So we will just say, we don't need to specify the file, so we're just going to say else, and then we'll handle the leaderboard. So leaderboard.append, and we'll do the same thing that we did with the countries. So line 0 and line 1 will look the same here, but actually handle different kind of data. So here we'll have a name and then a score, but this will make more sense later. Now we can create a function that writes to a file. So we will say def write file and pass in two arguments. We'll pass in a name and a score. So here we need to do with open, and we'll only deal with the scores.csv. We don't really need to bother with the countries because we're not making any changes to that one. And we'll open it in append mode. So append mode can either create a new file or add on to an existing one. If we open it in write file, it will overwrite anything that we have in that file, which is not what we want to do. So as scores, and now we need to create the object. So writer equals csv dot writer, pass in scores, and now we can write a row. So writer dot write row, and we need to pass in the name and the score. So this will create a file or append a file with a name and a score, and it will separate those values with a comma, just like the countries and the capitals here. Let's make sure that our function actually works now. So I'll just call it here, write file, I'll pass in some name, and I'll just say 5 for the score. It doesn't really matter. And in my folder here, we can see that I don't have a CSV file called scores. But if we run this, nothing prints to the screen because we're really just creating that file. Here we can see that we have a scores file, and if I open that, it says some name and 5. We're going to delete this for now because we want to do something else with it, but it works. So I've just gone in and deleted that scores.csv file, so it is no longer in our folder here. And we need to test something else, that's why I got rid of it. So we're going to write a new function here, and we'll call it load scores. So def load scores. In this function, we're going to clear our leaderboard to reset it to its original state. And this will make sense in just a minute, but if you think about it, when we read a file, let's say we're reading our scores file, we are populating this leaderboard. If we keep doing that, we're going to add the same values over and over again. So each time we want to get the score, we're going to delete the leaderboard and then read whatever is in that CSV file. Then we need to put in a try statement to check whether or not the scores.csv file exists, because loading a file that doesn't exist will cause a crash. So read file, and this will call the function up here. We need to pass in a file name. We'll pass in scores, And this will open up a new file or open up the CSV file and populate the leaderboard if the scores file exists. If the file doesn't exist, we'll say except file not found error. And here we need to write a new file. So we'll say write file, and then we'll pass in name and scores or score as the values. So notice we're not actually passing in a variable name and a variable score. We're not passing in any new information that we want to add to our CSV file. We're simply creating that first row that has the information about what is in that CSV file. So here it is capital, country and capital, and for the scores file, we're creating one that says name and score. So now let's say we want to load our score. We simply call that function, so load scores. And notice that the scores.csv file doesn't exist, but we're ready for that with this try statement. So since the scores file doesn't exist, we can't really do this. We're going to go down here, create a new file, and then say name and score as the first row. So if I run it, nothing happens because we're not doing anything, but the file is created and we see name and then score. Now let's run this one more time, but actually add a score. So we can load the scores again, that is not a problem. And then we can write file, and let's say we have a user now, so some user, and that user has scored 7. So we can run this. Again, nothing happens here, but if we go to the scores, we have name score, and then we have some user, and he has scored 7 points. Now we're going to do something a little bit more complicated. So here I will just create a couple more entries in our scores file. So write file, and I'll say Tom, let's say he scored 2 points. Write file, Sarah scored 8, and let's do one more. Let's say Bob scored 1, and for some user I'll just change that to Tim, and let's say he scored 4. So I will run this, and we simply just populated this list here. Now I'd like to sort this list, because when we have a leaderboard, it is usually sorted by score. So let's try doing that. Here, we no longer need this. Actually, we don't need any of these. I will do the sorting right here. So once we read the file, the leaderboard is populated, and now we can do something with it. So I will say leaderboard.sort. So this will sort our leaderboard according to whatever the first value is. So here we have names instead of the scores as the first value. So the list will actually be sorted in alphabetical order instead of by high score. So let's see that in action. We will load scores, and then we will print the leaderboard. So if I run it, we get Bob 1, Sarah 8, some user 7, Tim 4, Tom 2. I didn't choose the best names here to show that it's in alphabetical order, but you can see that it is. So we should really find a way to sort this list by high score and not by the name. And that could easily be done by just changing these values around. So we could say score, then name, and rearrange this, and it would work perfectly. But what if you wanted to use the value that's in the second place? Now that's what we're going to learn today. We're going to look at lambda functions. A lambda function is just a function that we use once and then throw it away. We don't give it a name. It just happens wherever we need it to happen. So what we need to do here is first we need to go into the sort method and pass in a key, and that key will be lambda. Now we need to give it an argument, so we'll say leader, and then the output. So we want leader 1. So the way to think about this is similar to what we have up here. We are passing in a list, And then within that list, we are getting whatever value is there. We're not getting the 0 value because that would be the name. We're getting the 1 index value. So we have the leader list, and inside of the leader list, we are focusing on the second value. So let's see what happens here if I run this. You notice we have Bob, Tom, Tim, some user, and Sarah. So the list has been changed, but not the way that we want it to. It is actually going from lowest score to the highest. We want it to go the other way around. That is very easy to fix. So here we need to say comma, reverse, and then set that to true. So setting sorting to true will just reverse the order. And let's run this. And we see Sarah with 8 points, some user with 7, Tim with 4, and so on. And just to show you what the reverse does without the lambda here, if we cut this out, you notice that this is still in alphabetical order, but in reverse alphabetical order. But again, we don't want alphabetical order. We want to make sure that we're getting the score and then reversing the list to go from highest to lowest. And here it is one more time. Now that we have all this set up, we can actually start creating the quiz. And we're going to put the quiz in a while loop. So while true, we need to read the file, and the file will be countries. So remember, we're calling the function read file, which goes up here, passing in countries, reading it, and since it is countries, we are going to populate the country list and shuffle that list. Then we need to load the score to create a file if it doesn't exist. So if we don't have a scores file, and I have deleted it, or actually no, there is one here, but if we don't have one, this will create a new file. And then we need to create a variable that will hold our scores. So my score equals 0. This will reset every time we play a new game. So it will start at 0 and the maximum will be 10. We get 1 for each correct answer. Then we'll create a little message to greet the user. So we'll say print, how well do you know your capitals? And we're going to introduce a new line, then say type quit to at any time to exit. And then we're going to concatenate a third part here. First we need to start a new line, and this part will actually just draw some stars underneath just so it looks a little bit nicer, and we'll see that in just a second. So star and then times 35, which means we will draw the star character 35 times under this text. I will also make sure to break out of the loop so we're not continuously printing this to the screen, just so we can test this out. So if I run this, we get how well do you know your capitals, type quit at any time to exit, we get the 35 stars, and then the program quits right now, but that's only because we're testing it. The next thing we're going to do is create a for loop to get the user input. And we're going to use a for loop so that we can ask the user 10 different questions. So we'll say for I in range 10. We will call this variable guess, and it will equal input. We use a formatted string here. And let's say what is the capital of, and now we need to get the capital, so, or the country. So we need to get the country list. We need to get the item that we want. So we want one of the first 10 items in this list. And then we also need to pass in the index value of that item, because remember, the country list consists of small lists that have 2 items each. It has the country and then the capital. We want to get the country, and that is in the 0 index value because the countries are first, the capitals are second. We will put a question mark here, start a new line, and then put 2 little arrows. This will make things look a little bit nicer. And let's actually see what that looks like. So we can just say break here and run it. And we have what is the capital of Venezuela, and then see we're on the next line here, which is kind of nice. And maybe we should even put a little space here just so it looks even better. So let's add that space and then we'll continue. So we'll put a space right there, get rid of this break, and now we can process the user guess. We'll say if guess equals quit. So if the user types in quit, we need to break, we need to get out of this. Then we need to say if guess dot title. We are using title to convert anything that will start with a lowercase. So if you say car, it will convert it to car. And this is helpful because if we look at our countries and capitals, they start with a capital letter. If for whatever reason the user doesn't use a capital letter, we still want to give them the benefit of the doubt. So if they start with a lowercase, we will just convert it. And we will say if that equals country list, get the correct pair. And now we're not getting the country, but we're getting the capital. So here we're getting the country, here we're getting the capital. So if those two are equal, we are going to increase the score, and we will also print out correct. If the user does not guess correctly, we'll say else, and we will just say print. We'll use a formatted string here. We'll say the correct answer is, and now we need to just pass in this right here. So we just need to say country list I1, because again, we're just getting the capital for that country. So country list I and 1. So now we can test this part. Let's try it. We have what is the capital of Mexico, and that is Mexico City. We have correct, and now we start asking the next question. Let's just get this one wrong, and it says the correct answer right here. So very good. Let's make sure that we're telling the user their score after each question. So here we're just going to have a simple print statement. We'll say print, and your score is, and now we can just pass in my score. So now each time we ask a question, so we'll ask for the capital, and when the user answers the question, so they can either get it right or wrong, we will display their score and then move on to the next question. Once we get through this for loop, the game will be over. So let's print that to the screen. We'll say print game over, and then we'll go to the next line and display the user's score. So we'll say score and just say my score. So this will print across 2 lines. Then we are going to ask the user to enter their name if they want to save the score. So we'll say my name equals input, and we'll say enter your name to save the score. Now if the user doesn't enter a name, we'll just save it under player, so it'll be an anonymous score. So if len my name is greater than 0, that means that the user has entered something. We will write file and pass in my name and my score. So that will go up to this function, this one here, and we'll pass in my name and score and write that to our CSV file. If the user doesn't enter anything, so else, we will just write to the file, and instead of saying my name, we will pass in player and then my score. So that will still save the score, but it'll be anonymous. The next thing we're going to do is print the leaderboard to the screen. So we have saved the player file here, or the player score. Now what we can do is say print top scores, and we will print the top 3 scores from our leaderboard list. And here's how we do that. We will first load the scores, and that will open up our CSV file, populate the leaderboard with the names and the scores, rearrange them so that we have the top score first, and now we can print them to the screen. So if len leaderboard is less than 3, so if it is less than 3, we'll just print however many there are. If we have 3 or more, we'll print the top 3. So for I in range len leaderboard, print, and we'll use a formatted string here. So we will print I plus 1 to get the position. So we'll have 1, 2, and 3 followed by decimal points. Then we need to get leaderboard, get the correct pair, and then get the name. Then we'll use a dash. Actually, this needs to be out here. Then we get the leaderboard, the correct pair, and we get the score. Let's also handle the else here. So else for I in range, and now we're just going to say 3 because we only want to display 3 scores. Print, we really just need to repeat what we have up there. So F, and we will do I plus 1, put a dot, then we do leaderboard, correct pair, get the name, and then we need to get the score. So leaderboard, so leaderboard, I, and 1. That should take care of it. So if we print this, we should get a printout of the top 3 scores in our scores.csv. I've gone into the folder and deleted the scores.csv file just so we can start from scratch. And I will do one more thing for testing here. I will just change this to 2 so that we're only going through the for loop twice. And now what's going to happen is once we get into the while loop, we are going to load the scores. Since the file doesn't exist, we will create one, play the game, and then down here we're going to write to a new file. There will only be 1 score, so we will display 1 name and 1 score at the end. So let's try this, and we get this and this. So I got both of them wrong. We have a score of 0. I will not enter a name, and sure enough, we get number 1 is player with a score of 0. All right, now let's try this again. So I think this is, oh, I spelled that wrong. So Netherlands, we can just say Amsterdam. And so we have 1 correct. We have a score of 1. And now we can enter a name. So let's just say John. And here we have John with a score of 1. And then second place is player with a score of 0. Before we move on, let me just address a possible issue. So in our write file function, you may have an issue. So one thing that can happen is when we have a CSV file and we use the append method to write something to it, the CSV file might end up putting a new line character here at the end of each line. If that happens, it can sometimes cause our file to be saved with the name and score. Then you get a blank line, and then you get the next name and score. If that happens, we have a big problem because we are iterating through each line in our file, and if we have an empty line, we're trying to pull data from an empty line, and we will get a crash. So to fix it, we just need to pass in another argument here. We just need to say new line, and then we need to pass in the new line character, so the backslash and n. So adding this to our code will avoid any issues that we might have saving to a CSV file. Now that we've taken care of this, let's go down to the range, change this back to 10 so that we can actually go through it 10 times. We will also give the user an option to play again. So we'll say play again equals input and enter or type yes to play again. Let's check what they've typed. We can say play again dot lower, which will just convert any characters they type in to lowercase characters, and we'll check whether or not that equals yes. So we'll say if play again dot lower doesn't equal yes, we will break out. of the loop, which brings us to the end of the game, and we'll just print thank you for playing. Finally, let's perform one last test. So we have Albania, so Tirana. I will actually just leave it at 1 so that we can see something at the end here. So we have a score of 1. I'll type in Fred for the name. And we can see John is still in first place with 1, and then Fred is in second place with 1. This is something that you can do on your own. You can write some code that maybe has them share first place. I will leave it as is. And finally, we get type yes to play again. I will say no, and we get thank you for playing. If you have enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, check out PyLearning Companion. The link is in the video description. You can also find the source code below.